and welcome back to my channel where I am revisiting some of my earlier class-related videos. In this companion video for the Druid's base class, I'm going to focus completely on the Druid's wild shape feature because the main class video that goes over level 2 did not go into much detail about it. The reason is because this feature is very rich in detail and it's very critical to a Druid, and it takes a lot of detail to get a good understanding of how it works, and the base class video was just getting a little bit overly long. I felt, due to the bulk of that video being taken up by this one feature, it made a lot more sense to separate it into its own little companion video. I do ask, however, that you be a little bit patient with me on this one because there is a lot of information to unpack with respect to how wild shape works. I'm going to do my best to try to explain everything in as much detail as I can, and this is going to really help you gain a better understanding of how this particular feature works, as well as understand some very important concepts and limitations around it. Before we get into the fun bits, I'm going to go over some of the limitations of the wild shape abilities and what they will mean to you. The first is that your character is only going to be able to use this feature twice before they will need to be able to complete a long or short rest in order to regain any spent uses, and that is why we set this up for 2 uses. The second is that at level 2, a given beast must have a challenge rating of 0, 1/8, or 1/4, though that does increase as your character gains levels. At level 4, your character gains the ability to access 1/2 challenge rating based creatures, and at level 8, your character gains access to challenge rating 1 based creatures. Another restriction at level 2 is that your character isn't going to be able to change into any beast that can fly or has a swimming trait just yet. Once again, you will gain the ability to do that at later levels. You will unlock swimming based creatures at level 4 and gain access to flying based creatures at level 8. Additionally, in order for you to be able to use that beast, it must have the beast type. And you can find that out by changing this particular type selection in the NPC selection list and making sure that your selection is set to beast. And that will narrow it down to all of the beasts that your character can change into, although initially it will show creatures that you can't immediately change into at level 2. The other component to that is that your character must have seen those particular beasts. So if your character has never seen a cat, you can never change into a cat. If your character has never seen a rat or an owl, they cannot change into those because they don't understand the shape and form of that particular creature until they've seen it visually. And it is not something that they can just simply use a study guide to gain access to. They actually have to see a legitimate creature in order to be able to change into those shapes. And the final limitation around this is that the duration that your character can remain in that form is equal to half of your character's druid level before they will involuntarily change back into their normal form. Please note the distinction I made to that with respect to the level when I stated druid level. I don't mean your character level, as they are 2 completely different concepts. A character level is the total number of levels your character has. So if you're multi-classing, then you need to add up all of those class levels in order to figure out what your character level is. This is why a level 1 character can't start as a multi-classed character, because it would require a minimum of a level 2 character. Let's say, for example, that you have a multi-classed character with a 5th level druid and a 3rd level fighter. Your character level would be 8, as it's the sum of each of those classes' levels that brings that character up to that value. This is important because the only value you consider as part of your wild shape feature is the druid level, which in this case is level 5 for our example. This means that if your character is level 5, they would be able to maintain their wild shape form for a total of 2 hours because it's your level divided by 2, and then that in turn is rounded down. It is always rounded down to the nearest whole hour. So if you had 2.5 as your total result, which 5 divided by 2 equals 2.5, you would then round that down to the nearest hour, which would be 2 in this case. However, if you're watching this as a level 2 character, as long as both of your levels are in the Druid class, that means that your character can remain in their wild shape form for a total of 1 hour before they will revert. It is possible for your character to choose to revert to their normal form willingly, but it can also happen involuntarily, and I will go over those in a few minutes, as it's a very important topic to cover. Before I get into that though, I want to explain what beasts your character can start off with. The player's handbook has a number of creatures that your character can choose from, though new creatures are available through many of the supplements that round out the 5th edition genre. You can find these creatures by selecting the NPCs option here, changing your type to beast, and then setting the challenge rating value here to be either 0, 1/8, or 1/4 if you're at level 2. You can also choose 1/2 at level 4, or a challenge rating of 1 at level 8. When you select a value here, it's not going to show you previous lower level challenge rating based creatures. It's going to narrow it down to those creatures specific to that challenge rating that you have selected. So just be cognizant of that. At level 2, your character has access to the cat, rat, mastiff, mule, boar, panther, riding horse, or wolf if your DM has made those as the only choices that you have available to you, meaning that they've only allowed you to load the player's handbook. However, there are some dungeon masters that will allow you to select a specific kind of creature and be able to change into that form as long as it doesn't fall into the swimming or the flying category right off. And that's because maybe it's a creature that is more relevant to where you have based your character's origins from, and thus they are familiar with it. So when in doubt, always ask your dungeon master to see if that is something that they will allow. Other beasts become available at later levels, and I explain which ones become available in the base class video itself, but I can provide you a quick hint as to what actually shows up. At level 4, you will gain access to these particular creatures here. And because at level 4 you're gaining access to the swimming-based option, you're also gaining access to the crocodile and the reef shark, in addition to any of the swimming features like the poisonous snake here. I think the constrictor is also a swimming-based creature. I don't think there's anything here that swims. No, there isn't. So those would be the additional creatures that you're gaining access to. However, at level 8, you're also unlocking challenge rating 1 based creatures, which is going to cover all of these creatures. And because you're unlocking the ability for flying creatures to come into play, you now have access to the eagle and any of the other flying creatures that were available in the previous challenge ratings. And because I've shown how you actually go through and change into these particular beasts in the official base class video for the Druid class that deals with level 2, I'm not going to regurgitate that here, if you will. So if you want to understand how it's actually functional and used within Fantasy Grounds Unity, you're going to want to watch that particular segment of the video. Now for the remaining duration of the video, I'm going to use this wolf as our example so that you can get some context as to the various points that I'm going to discuss next. At the time that the Dungeon Master creates an instance of the creature that you're changing into, that creature is going to gain hit points. And if the Dungeon Master is playing with defaults in play, then you're going to have an 11 as the total number of hit points if you choose this wolf. Otherwise, if they are allowing the creatures to roll for their total number of hit points, you might end up with a total of 18 as your maximum value, although getting 18 is probably pretty rare. However, generally your character is going to end up with a total number of hit points in beast form that are lower than what your character actually has. But not always. This wolf, for example, actually can end up, if they're doing rolls, with a higher number of total hit points than what your character would normally have at level 2. Not always, but sometimes. As your character unlocks additional creature types, that tiered component, if you will, to the total number of hit points scales a little bit higher, but it does eventually plateau to the point where you're now guaranteed to get nothing but lower hit points than what your character physically has. But that is one of the few things you'll want to keep in mind when you're switching into a creature is what's going to happen to their total number of hit points. Is it going to be the default average, or is it actually going to be randomly rolled so that you could theoretically end up with lower than the default average or higher? It really doesn't matter, but it all comes down to how the Dungeon Master has their campaign session set up for those particular kinds of rolls. One of the most important topics has to do with what happens when your character is in their wild shape form and they suffer enough damage to reduce their beast form to a total of 0 hit points, or some other effect has happened due to a specific kind of spell being cast. When your character is in the shape of the beast and they are struck with a spell, melee or range-based weapon, or some other object that does damage to your character that would then reduce them to 0 hit points, something special is going to happen. Your character is going to revert back to their normal form involuntarily, and if this is due to any excessive damage, anything that is left over from that attack would be applied to your own character directly. For instance, let's say that your character in their beast form had a total number of 12 hit points, and they suffered an attack that dealt 15 points of damage. Then the 12 hit points would be applied against the beast, causing your character to revert, and then they would suffer the remaining 3 hit points of damage to the character directly, as if they were attacked while they were in their normal form and suffered the total amount of 3 points of damage. Your character would remain conscious and active on the field of battle, and it's this case that I feel is not really clearly explained in the information sheets, because if you read that multiple times, it kind of assumes that your character is not going to be going unconscious, but it doesn't explain it directly. Many DMs believe your beast was effectively supposed to go unconscious due to the reduction to 0 hit points, but a good way to clarify that point, and the way that I think about it, is like this. When a character is in their wild shape form, they are concentrating on maintaining that beast form, and the HP represents how focused your character's concentration is with respect to maintaining that shape change. Now, this differs from a normal concentration check. This is just a concept that I have come up with to help explain how this feature works. As they suffer damage, that focus is going to start to wane the closer they get to 0 hit points, and eventually once 0 hit points is reached, it's no longer possible for them to maintain that concentration, thus your character is going to change back to their normal form. But there are some other things that need to be taken into account, and we're going to discuss those now. If your character is put to sleep through the use of a spell such as the sleep spell, it is going to instantly break your character's concentration on maintaining that beast form. Thus, they are then going to revert to their normal form and remain asleep at the same time. Just because your character has changed form doesn't nullify the effects that are attached to your character. Unless something happens to break the conditions of the sleep spell that maintain its control over your character, they will be unable to regain consciousness. Something has to interfere with that spell to be able to bring your character out of that state, be it being attacked, the spell itself is being dispelled or expires, or anything else that would be used to cancel its state. If your character is immune to sleep spells, such as an elf or a half-elf, while they are in their normal form, then your character is not going to be able to be put to sleep through that method. Thus, they are going to retain their beast form and remain awake. And we'll get into this a little bit later, but generally, those capabilities transition over into your beast form while you're in that shape. Something else to consider, though, is what happens if your character is hit with the power word kill spell or some other similar spell while they are in beast form. In this case, if your character's beast form has less than a total number of 100 hit points, the condition of the spell would apply and your character would be instantly killed. This means that your character would fall dead, revert to their normal form, and remain dead. For example, if your character used this wolf form, their maximum total number of hit points is 18 hit points if it's being rolled, or 11 if the default averages are chosen. If the spell was cast against your character at that point in time, then the spell would kill your character outright. And this has been confirmed as intended behavior by Wizards of the Coast, regardless of the total number of HP your character has in their normal form. This is because there is no direct damage being applied to your character's normal form. The condition simply is, quote unquote, as long as the creature chosen has less than 100 hit points, which at the time of the spell was cast would fit the situation if your character was in their wolf form. Under that condition, your character would collapse, revert to their normal form, and then remain dead, no exceptions, although they could potentially be resurrected. At the time you choose to have your character use their wild shape to assume the form of a beast, you get to choose what happens to any of your character's equipment, and there are 3 choices. The first is that it simply drops to the ground, and it is the easiest option to consider. The second is that it melds into your character's wild shape form, becoming part of that shape, though it is no longer usable, has no effects, and is simply stored in limbo until your character reverts back to their normal form. This means your armor would no longer be part of the armor class calculation, any magical items that were worn have their effects and benefits removed, and are unusable. If you're unsure how to do that, I've gone ahead and quote-unquote optimized how our particular characters set up and configured here with respect to their inventory. What you can do is simply modify this particular icon here so that it's empty. And this will work regardless of whether you're dropping it or whether the equipment itself is melding into your character's form. As soon as you make it unavailable, set that to there, and remove it so that it's no longer adding any benefit to your character, what's going to happen here is that your armor class is going to drop. The weapons themselves will no longer be available to you from your character sheet, things like that. However, when you revert back to your normal form, all you have to do is simply make sure that you go ahead and update each of these to ensure everything is now there. So in this case, we want our weapons and armor to be equipped, everything else just simply to be carried. Our armor class is going to return, and the available weapons that we have here are going to return. This is one of the reasons why I recommend my players go and organize their particular inventory to make it a little bit easier to manage for them. The third option is that you can choose to wear the equipment, although only equipment that is practical for the new shape would remain on your character. The remainder would drop or meld into your character. For instance, your character would drop their quarterstaff to the ground if you chose for them to take the shape of a wolf, but the belt and backpack might remain, Boots and hats might also remain, and armor could be retained if it fits that form, although the Dungeon Master might introduce a few penalties if they feel it could be a little bit too awkward. When your character is in their wild shape, their actions and capabilities are also affected, in some ways beneficial and others not so nicely. We saw, for example, that their armor changed when they changed form and the equipment melded into their character, and they also lost the ability to use their weapons. But it's also not possible to cast spells while your character is in their wild shape. However, any spells that require concentration to maintain them and were cast prior to shape-shifting remain as long as your character's concentration is maintained. Additionally, if a spell has been cast that has subsequent actions that can be triggered, such as those from a Call Lightning or Move Earth spells, you can still use those actions as long as they do not require speech. And that is because your character loses the ability to speak with their normal speech methods. However, any vocalizations that are capable by the beast itself can be made by your character, although they might not necessarily be coherent unless your character themselves understands what that language is and what it's meant to be. Otherwise, it's just going to sound like gibberish. Other creatures of the same type can understand it if you yourself are able to understand it as well. The final limitation is that your character will also be unable to use any action that requires hands, such as holding and attacking with a sword or quarterstaff, for example. However, the things that your character can do include those of the beast itself. For example, in this particular case, this wolf can bite. Other animals might have the ability to use claws, as well as bites. Those actions and capabilities are going to be found within the information sheet associated with each NPC that you can switch into. You will also still be able to use any of the features and actions that don't themselves require speech in order to function. So any benefits that you have gained from your class specialization, or any traits that you have acquired through your character's race, and any features that you've gained through the class or the background, they will all still be applicable. The last thing to make note of is with respect to what happens to your character's ability scores and skills when they are in their wild shape form. The first thing that's going to happen is that your character's strength, dexterity, and constitution are going to update to be that of the creature. However, your character retains their intelligence, wisdom, and charisma. So in the case of this wolf, for example, your character's strength is going to be equal to 12, not 14. The dexterity is going to remain the same because it is the same value, but your character's constitution is going to temporarily drop to 12 from 17. That is not going to have any effect of your character's total hit points that you see down here. It is simply going to come into play whenever you make a saving throw, skill check, or an ability check. Your character is also going to retain all of their proficiencies with respect to any saving throws that have to come into play, any skills that come into play, and with the proficiency score itself. However, your character is also going to gain any proficiencies that come through here. So if there's a proficiency bonus that is here that is higher than what your character has, you will use that for your ability checks and your anything else that requires a proficiency bonus to be added. And that will work with any condition where the beast that you have switched into happens to have a higher bonus with respect to any skills or saving throws, as well as ability checks. You can use the higher bonus if you wish. For the sake of example, I'm going to temporarily roll back our druid to level 2. I'm not actually going to change anything here, but what we're going to do is visualize that the proficiency bonus here is +2, not +4. We're going to state, for the purposes of this example, that our wisdom modifier managed to remain as +5. So we still have a 20 wisdom when it comes to our ability score. Let's also say that our example, the wolf, has a +3 proficiency bonus here, not +2. So continuing with the assumption that our characters currently get a +2 proficiency and the wolf has a +3 proficiency, we would have to add 1 point to any saving throw that we're proficient in, as well as any of the ability scores that we have here. With respect to the ability scores, that is actually fairly easy to do. All you have to do is simply add in a +1, and you will gain the difference while you make that roll. And then when you're done, just simply clear it out. The pain point is going to be with the saving throw itself, because you have to modify this to be able to make the adjustment and bring it up to a +8. So you will have to add in the +1 every time you make a saving throw there. I suppose the other capability that you could do would be to have the Dungeon Master update this wisdom to reflect that change as well with respect to the saving throw. When it comes to ability checks themselves, so you're making a strength check or you're making a dexterity check, the higher value wins. So if our strength of 14 here came into play, unfortunately, you would not be able to do that because your strength, your dexterity, and your constitution override what your character has here. You wouldn't be able to use those for your ability checks. It's only going to be applicable for these three. So that's something that you'll have to keep in mind as well. You will use whatever value is here with respect to any strength-based check, dexterity-based check, or constitution-based check. However, you would use the higher of the values here, regardless of whether it's from here or from here, whenever you're dealing with an intelligence, wisdom, or charisma-based check. On top of that, your character is also going to gain the traits of the beast. So in this case, keen hearing and smell, meaning you're gaining advantage on any wisdom-based perception check, and you're gaining whatever benefits Pack Tactics is going to allow you to add with respect to any combat-based situation. But there is one limitation here. You can see here that this wolf does not have dark vision, yet our character does. When you switch into the wolf, you lose that dark vision capability for the duration that the wolf is on the field of battle, or whatever map you happen to be walking around on. Whenever you switch back into the half-elf form, if you're using a half-elf based character, then you would regain dark vision capabilities once again. And now you can see why I chose to separate out the discussion of wild shape into its own video, because there is a huge amount of information here you have to unpack. It'll also allow me to index this video so that it's very easy to gain access to specific parts of that video if you ever need to refresh your memory about something. However, to see how the wild shape feature can be set up and used in your character sheet, I recommend watching the Druid's base class video where I go over level 2, and I'll be sure to include that link in the description below. We are, however, at the end of this video. I want to thank you for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.